the leader and those who are in the PAC, are we solving the problem?
No, we're not. And PAC, okay, PAC is a parliamentary committee. The EACC is a PR gimmick as far as I'm concerned. It's a conscience, it soothes our conscience that we have somebody who we can call every time we suspect corruption has happened, and then we can say they're dealing with it as we continue with what we're doing. PACC, and to just add up to what Martin is saying, for as long as we haven't had a conversation in this country about how politicians get into office, about how they sustain their lifestyles, if we've never talked about how much money Ababu had before he became a member of parliament, how much he has now, and where it came from, and not just Ababu, any member of parliament, what tends to happen is this: I will be corrupt for as long as I can get away with it. Why? Because nobody, I'm not held accountable to anyone. If I get into a position of influence, it is that influence that people are paying for. And let's also not be, okay, I know it sounds bad when I say let's not be hard on ourselves. Let us accept one thing: graft is an international problem. Every country in the world deals with the issue of graft. And I remember a prime minister of Malaysia, was it Malaysia, who was once told about corruption, and he asked, so what? Because for him, he was asking, so what are you actually telling me? That we have corruption in my country, but we are doing A, B, C, and D. So different countries do it in a different way. Now, in most developed countries, what they have done is distinguish the various processes that go into graft. So you have lobbying as a legal process that you pay taxes. You actually have organizations who lobby. What we call corruption here, in some countries, is actually a legal process. In the US, it's a lobbying process. You have companies who are established to collect money from, for example, the cigarette manufacturers, and every time a law is introduced in Congress or Senate that goes against the cigarette manufacturers, they collect money, they go and get senators, take them to a hotel, give them presentations and gifts about why they should not pass that law, and it is legitimate. Now, what they call corruption there is where you actually collect money to go and overturn a law. Now here, we don't have a distinction of the entire process, and that's what makes it so hard to fight it. Because some of the things that we do, other people are like, but that's okay.
It's okay.
You call members of parliament, put them into a hotel, and told them, don't pass this law. This is lobbying. Here, we say this is corruption. And that's what makes it so difficult to fight, because we don't know where it
what
becomes.
Are we fighting?
Yes.
All right, Omingo, after the president was sworn in, came into power, we saw him talk about these figures in the office of the president. It appeared that they were, being held hostage, a powerless executive coming in and already confessing and saying that there are certain corrupt individuals in here. Then you have the PAC and the whole legislature, in essence, being, laid bare in terms of the corruption and the rot in there. You have the EACC as well in its own mess. It appears to me in this conversation there is no hope in as far as this fight against corruption.
I believe we shouldn't quit, because if we did then quit, we're actually submitting ourselves into oblivion, and I think there should be hope. And what I was a chairman of Public Accounts Committee, and as my brother say, it is true that there are temptations. I remember when we were sense of a matter, one of the Anglo-Indian contracts, somebody will follow you even to when you're traveling and tells you, I suppose this would happen and we fix this. So the best thing you do is tell them, now that you can help us and do the puzzle, we write to the clerk of National Assembly, you come and give evidence. They will disappear from your site. What we are saying here is there are few members of parliament who I think will be doing a good job. But you can't say all the basket is rotten. I do believe there is one who can save this country from what's going through. But the hopelessness we see, even from the executive, it worries, because where then we stop if even our leaders are lamenting about their inability to do things? Perhaps again, quite honestly, as they said, some people even buy their own freedom when they are campaigning, for example, to get some favor in the system. People will come and when you campaign and say they give you 500 million, when you come to power, you can't even look at them on the eye. You gloss over. So the process is actually a cyclic thing that starts from electioneering and all, that even compromises those ones supposed to execute the powers given to them, courtesy of the law, which we have in a set of books, but you can't implement because already it's weighing on our backs because we're already chewed. And you cannot chew and speak at the same time. You are either chewing or speaking.
Olo, do you feel like maybe, just like Mujiri was alluding to earlier on, that maybe we're being too hard on ourselves, and possibly we need to have this conversation as a nation, first of all, to define what exactly is corruption? Maybe we don't even understand what corruption is, because from what Omigo Magara mentioned earlier, if you send your child and you give them a sweet, you know, you're sort of rewarding them, as it were. And it may be looked at as not a very bad thing to do, to reward the child for them to go to the shop. But again, what culture are you building in them that later in life they feel that for me to do anything that I'm supposed to do, I need a reward? Should this conversation maybe be brought back to the table and we redefine what constitution is?
I think we
what,
should. I think we should, Mike. The point is that we must differentiate, and I want to come back to the issue of the incentive, that I am sending you and I'm giving you an incentive for you to go. So that's okay in terms of, you know, even in terms of education. When my child does well, or when I want my child to be competitive, there are some promises, there's some rewards we have.
Exactly.
So, and I would call those incentives. Now the question then we need is to come to a point where we ask ourselves, wait a minute, are we just making noises to ourselves without realizing? Now let me for a moment sound a bit interesting, because I want to say something that people will find interesting. Is corruption a bad thing, as we are saying? If it was so bad, why would it be doing so well around here? And I watched the commentator there, my friend Kwame from IEA, saying that, you know, he wonders why this economy hasn't collapsed, given the colossal sums of monies that have been spent. Actually, it's the other way around. Why is it that when everybody's seeing things this country is doing very badly, the traffic jam is so high, new vehicles are on the road, new buildings are coming up, hotels are coming up, business seems to be booming? Now, there is a side of how business is working that we need to understand. And what Mujiri was saying a little earlier, that we actually there's a process here, and we must come to a process. We must look at this process and decide, where do we criminalize it? Because there are certain things that people are doing. For example, people are going and winning tenders in the counties, and they are putting up hotels in those very counties, and they are creating jobs in those very counties. Now, you can talk about whatever you want to say, but there's a way in which this money is getting back to this economy. Indeed, there are people who are taking money and putting it in the US offshore bank accounts. Do you know why those guys offer those incentives into those? Because when that money is in those offshore countries, that money benefits that economy. There's a way in which that money just becomes a part of that. Do you know why, for example, in this country, there's a time when we seem to be doing very badly, and yet our foreign reserves were still looking very good. Businesses are booming, you know, because some of the money that was piracy money was finding itself in this economy. So there is a lot that we can say. But
all right,
this is what I call legitimizing.
Bunjiri,
No, he said it's not all gloom and doom.
do you feel we need to redefine corruption? Maybe we don't understand it.
Actually, first and foremost, we do need to have a conversation about what corruption actually is, and agree, as Martin is saying, at what point do we criminalize that process? And pick that example you used. For all those of us who have children, you have conversations with them about how you need to go and do well, and if you do well, I will do A, B, C, D, right, in school. Now, what that conversation does is because you see, the child is doing well for themselves. It is actually not for you. The child going and doing well in school is to their benefit. Now, that is the same argument we use when we employ somebody, and then we say that unajua hiyo kazi umepatiwa, you are supposed, when you say that kazi ya askari ni kukusaidia, and then when you call him because you are having people at your gate who you don't know, and he tells you he has no fuel, and you are starting to complain and telling him, lakini si kazi yako ni kuja kusaidia. When you tell that child to go and read and you will pay him, it's an incentive, as Martin says. But what the culture, it tells you the culture we have as a people, that we, even when it is what is expected of you, we will still give an incentive. We will suggest that, you know what, if you help me here, I will do the following. Now, there's for any person in business, you are told that the biggest provider of business anywhere in the world is government. It is the only institution that collects money from people to give back. You know, there's that conversation. Government collects money in taxes to pay back to the people, to Kenyans in business. Now, what tends to happen is that, and why corruption is so difficult to fight, is that you've got tenders going, from uniforms for policemen to guns. You know, every single sector of our government actually, how do you call it, is a conduit of money back to Kenyans. Now, these businesses are given to people. There's a decision-making process of how that particular person gets his business. Our problem with corruption is that the people we call corrupt tend to follow the process to the end. In essence, they corrupt the process in a way that you can't go back to court. Actually, they make sure that they get, before the tender is out, they've had a conversation with the tender committee. They've crafted the tender in a way that they're the only ones who qualify for it. The tender goes to the newspaper. They put in their papers properly, according to the expectations.
The rules.
They win the tender. They get the tender. But you see, the process was corrupted right from the beginning. We had agreed that we were going to put this tender this way. We are going to cost it 5 billion. The 1 billion extra is going to be shared among all of us. Now, when you start chasing that person for corruption, at what point do you get them? Because they have followed the law to the end. They'll pay taxes, and whatever money will be disbursed in a way that you can't actually go and get it. So a guy will build a house, and he will say, no, you know, I went and got a legal law. The lawyer who actually did the deal will be paid 80 million shillings as legal fees. Now, that is an astronomical figure, but compared to what? At what point do you go and justify that you should not have been paid 80 million, you should have been paid 10? He'll say, no, I negotiated, and we agreed I was going to be paid 80, and the client paid me 80. So that's a problem of corruption in this country.
A conversation needs to be initiated in this country, right from our bedrooms, in our houses and dining rooms, and in society, as it were. I don't quite agree with my brother that, well, unless you define what you call good corruption or bad corruption, I think that line is so thin to a point of legitimizing what is necessarily not right. Corruption is that you take advantage of by virtue of your position to your own benefit. What you are doing, therefore, you are denying somebody that benefit if it was a competitive, fair practice. And in some jurisdictions, yes, they are allowed facilitation fees or lobbying fees. In Malaysia, they realized that they want to lose a war in the contract. The Prime Minister then said, you are allowed a leverage of up to 5%.
Yes.
Beyond 5 is criminal. In some of cases in our country, it is 100% lost. I mean, what do you call that? A criminal. So we need to re-engage and redefine ourselves, as my brother say, but again, we require a national conversation. And please, media, you must help us on this, because this country would have been a superpower today as we speak. And indeed that we are still standing is because of the courtesy of Kenyans' hard work and their perseverance in this situation.
So, Martin, are you confident that at the end of this Anglo-leasing cases we're seeing now ongoing, stuff you have been charged, that there will be powerful people behind bars, prosecuted, found guilty? Because usually it's the smaller people that you see get the life sentences and all this, but the bigger, more powerful figures get away.
Sophia, I wish I could give you hope that these Anglo-leasing prosecutions will result into anything. I can tell you from where I sit that there will be, this is a good exercise, and a few fellows will go to court for mentions, maybe 100 times.
Some lawyers will make
some money,
A
some
lot of
good money, good money, because not to move to go and represent them, I'm sure some people are smiling. So there will be some money that will pass on, but there is no chance that these people will actually be found guilty. And the reason being that they are not going to face this prosecution just lying down. They'll do everything they can, everything in their power, including use the very money to buy their freedom. So that is going to be a tough one. What I think we need to do is to begin, and I want to agree with what Omingo is saying, let's have a conversation, but let's also begin to admit that we have failed. You know, it's one thing to start saying, well, this is, let's say, look, we have failed. Is there any other way we can approach this thing that can be effective? Now that can give us a conversation that will help us to craft something that we can get out of. So when we go back, and I can't leave him before I accuse his members, political parties. If you go back to political parties, and the only way they want to win elections is through corrupting and making sure that our morals, our voters are actually just a machine. So there's no policy, no nothing. So we need to do that. And these are these things we've said. We've even said that we need a election financing law, so that people are limited to what they can actually spend. And we need to convince ourselves that actually it's not about money, but it's about policies and so on. So we have a lot of civic education to do. We need to carry Kenyans along with us. But the critical thing is this, that corruption is not eliminated by creating of institutions. It is by simply having a leadership that leads from the front. When you want to see why Rwanda is where it is, it's not because of the commissions. Yes, they may have commissions, but it's because of the leadership. When the leader
But are they more corrupt? They were ranked more corrupt by the Transparency International study than Kenya. We are doing better in terms of corruption perception index.
I would need to look at that. But the issue
Last year's, yes.
The issue about Rwanda is this, that the president says no more cars of this, and he leads by surrendering his and ensures everybody else there. So there's some wastage that if you can control, it helps the country. So sometimes leadership does it. It could be parliament's leadership, it could be the judiciary's leadership, but more importantly, it must be the executive. The leadership from the presidency and the deputy and the rest of the executive have to demonstrate that, look, we are not going to tolerate this. And then institutions come along. For now, we have a long way to go, and it's not that we are losing hope, but we are just, for me, we are just being realistic. Let's not live here and Kenyans think that we are going to fight this thing, it goes.
And it goes.
Unless a Kenyan is not willing to bribe, there will be no person to receive a bribe. Because unless business is not willing to bribe, there will be no person receiving a bribe. And if those incentives are not there, then we'll get services. There is, of course, something the government is saying, that let us open up the procurement system, let's make it e-based, let a Kenyan know how this procurement was done, and let a Kenyan raise issues. Of course, a level of openness and transparency helps reduce corruption. And there are some elements of those that we can see being pushed for. But at the end of the day, it is going to be a decision that we make as Kenyans, that I will not bribe. I will not drive badly.
Okay.
I will not do, so these things will have to come down
Right
to me.
from the basics. Gunjiri, Anglo-leasing has reared its ugly head time and again, and it has come back this time. Do you feel like there would be prosecutions and convictions this time?
No, and again, it's just you and I who will call it ugly. Eh? It's only you and I who will call that an ugly head. There are people seated down somewhere who it is another means of making more money. But then, even more fundamentally, I think the only way we'll ever fix the aspect of our business that is corrupt is to have is to sort out our politics. And I keep hearing people trying to distinguish politics from the way we live. It is not possible. Everything we do in this country is run by politics, whether it is business, whether it is religion, whether it is, when we talk about institutions, those institutions, including the judiciary, is formed by politicians. Remember, by the time the Chief Justice had to be vetted by parliamentarians. Every single institution, the chairman of the Anti-Corruption Commission was vetted by politicians. The president is elected through a political process. The executive is a political institution. The institutions of government are political institutions. They are run by public servants who are professionals, but who are actually managed by politicians. So the entire system our entire social system is a political system. Now, what happens is that if I'm going to have to bribe my party leader to get a nomination certificate, I'm going to have to bribe the voters to put me in office. Then when I get into office, and then you expect me to create an institution that is not corrupt. Do you remember that clip of Alfred Keter saying, we make laws? So if that law is not working for us, we will change it. This is what we need to remember, that every time we talk about corruption, we're talking about a law that, one, is not defined, that, two, can be changed at any time if it affects a powerful person. Because the person who, when you have a major business supplier, he understands that you do business by owning politicians. So the first thing you do before even a politician goes to run for office, you call a few promising people, you tell them, look, I'm going to support your campaign. I'm going to give you 20 million shillings. When you get into office, I'll expect you to open for me doors in government to get me business. That becomes a transaction conversation they have. Now, when that guy gets into office, then you go and arrest that businessman who funded this campaign and expect this politician to pass a vote of confidence or to pass a law that is going to put that guy in jail. It's not possible.
Not going to happen.
And that is where our problem in corruption begins. And the second thing is that the people who are forming the laws that we then now start using to prosecute others who are corrupt are people who understand. So you're forming a law to protect your interests. So if we're going to form a procurement law, we're actually going to form it in a way that helps us. So if you're going to say open, we're going to have an open,
transparent.
transparent, then what we're going to do is make sure that it is open to the point in which it helps us. And if it doesn't, if it reaches a point, we've seen from Haron Mwau to Lumumba, to if you become uncomfortable, as parliament, we are going to pass a vote of no confidence in you, we are going to fire you, we are going to put somebody else who works according to how
toes
we
the
want it.
line.
The president, when he wakes up and says, I am going to clamp down on corruption, he runs an entire system that can actually impeach him. Do you remember when MPs said they wanted more money? The president went to Nyeri, I've never forgotten, and he begged MPs to please listen to Kenyans and not increase their salaries. Close to 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, he actually signed the bill that increased their salary. Why? Because those MPs told him, boss, if you continue behaving like this, you know we can actually send you home.
Okay.
That is how corruption works.
Omingo, and as we do our parting shots, because you have about 2 minutes to go, what is the way forward? What do you expect going forward from the executive, from the legislature, judiciary? Does it have a role in this? What must happen to ensure, well, we may not completely eradicate, to get rid of corruption? Maybe one would argue that's impossible, but how does this conversation need to go forward?
We require a deliberate and frank discussion, starting from ourselves and even in calculating that business of ownership of owning this country, because Kenya is ours. And when you steal, tell these people should understand that you are picking money from one pocket to the other and running away pretending that we have stolen. I think that is where we need to start, and people should be having that conscience of a nation. And let me say this very, very strongly, that existence of corruption and non-existence of corruption is starts and ends with a political decision. And I can't put it more ably than they are putting here, that it is critical that even those members of parliament who are sitting out there, some of us have gone for complete circle, have been out, in and out, we should make laws that are actually safeguards the nation beyond yourself. But apparently what we do is sometimes we make laws that are insulating us as we exist. When we leave, we don't care what happens. That's why people get lamenting even when they had self-inflicted injuries on the laws that we make. So we need to polish up the parliament, and I think there are a few ways we need to re-engage that assembly and regain the confidence. Otherwise, where they are today, they hit the lowest of the low, and I think Kenyans are losing confidence. Again, they're the same ones who are supposed to undo this puzzle. Yet again, they have no moral authority. But we're saying they should redeem themselves. The lucky thing is, if we are to suffer for a little long, it should be about 3 more years, because Kenyans then can do an audit. And I hope next time when we do that audit must be seen with integrity and be able to campaign on a different platform. Of course, it's a gradual process. Kenyans still live and thrive on handouts before they elect you, and some people want to go back and look for more money and go and buy those votes. But we're saying there has to start a point from individual re-examination and saying that we need to correct this and build our nation, which is our motherland.
Martin, this is deeply rooted, it's entrenched in our culture as a people, as we've all been talking about this morning. What is that will get, as you say, they need to change, they need to earn more confidence? What is that will get a member of parliament, a senator, somebody to say, oh, now, here on, it's country first. We need to think about the best interests of the country. What is that thing?
It will take us a transformation, and our transformation will have to move from one thing to another. We will have to get away from rule by law to rule of law. And the difference is that not every problem we have will be solved by creating a law. Rather, it will be solved by the principles we firmly believe in, by the respect we have for our institutions, the respect we have for our processes, and the belief we have that things can be done within a civilized manner. So that if I know today the court is saying that CDF Act is unconstitutional, the first statement I make is that we hear the court and we respect the decision of the court and we are ready to abide by it. That's the first statement I hear. The opposite of it is that the first thing we hear from members of parliament that this thing we are going to make sure it is here. So that is now the rule by law, because what they want to do is to simply go and change the law so that they can continue doing the things they are doing. We want to encourage ourselves. I mean, the other societies do not necessarily have written up constitutions like the UK. but they have principles that they have accepted to live by.
Okay.
They have institutional, arrangements that they have decided to live by. So Parliament needs to respect judiciary. Judiciary needs to respect Parliament. And the assemblies that we have created, which now looks like another volatile volcano we've created for ourselves, ought to play by the rules, ought to understand that they are people's representatives and they are not about themselves.
All right.
The more leaders realize that they are for us and not for themselves, the better we are likely to be as a society.
Finally, Ngunjiri.
We can actually solve corruption in this country by doing two things, two very simple things. First and foremost, we must accept that we have elected 390 or 400 people who represent the conscience of our country. This is what, as a democracy, we elect 400 people approximately and give them the responsibility and the mandate to create a culture that we work with. They make laws for us, they oversee how those laws are implemented, and they change them according to what we think they should happen. So the most important person, if we're going to fight corruption, is that person we put in office as an elected member of parliament or MCA. So the thing we must do, one, we must pass a campaign election finance bill. We must agree how much money you can spend to run for MCA, the maximum. You can spend less, but the maximum that you should spend to run for MCA, to run for senator, to run for governor, to run for member of parliament, to run for president. We must agree. The next thing is that we must agree that you must explain where you got that money from. It must be public record that if I ran for MCA, we had agreed the maximum I can raise to run for MCA is 5 million shillings. I raised 5 million shillings and I got it from this person, this person, this person, and this person. Then you, as a person who's been elected, must put on record how much money you actually have. You must list what you own and where you got it from.
Okay.
Once we fix our elected members of parliament, our lawmakers, then when that person is elected, he will have absolutely no incentive to actually corrupt. Because first and foremost, I spent 10 million shillings together with my competitor and everybody else. So I was elected on ideas, not on money.
All right.
Then I actually go and form laws that are based on the fact that I'm already clean by the time I get into that office.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll have to wind it up right there. Thank you so much, Martin Olo, political analyst. We have Ngunjiri Wambogo, political commentator, and Omingo Magara, chair for CMD Kenya and party leader for PDP. Thank you so very much, gentlemen. And evidently, this is a conversation that we cannot finish here and now.
Definitely not.
And it looks to me like it's a conversation that we also need to have, not just at the political or at a high level, but even in our homes, because really, it is not just about the politicians. And like Ngunjiri has finished by saying, it is a cross-section. It is a, a selection from the community.
Yeah, it definitely requires that it begins right at home. It's as much as how you interact with your kids and the kind of, some ukifanya hivi, nitafanya hivi. But Masame Machuka, who's watching, says, his tweet here, perhaps it's time we made corruption legal so that it can become a vice. You know how people will always tilt to what's wrong, just because you said don't do this, then everybody wants to do the same.
Yes.
But hey, thank you for your views as well. We'll take a short break, and when we return,
well, we come back with Fitness Thursday, and I hope you have yourselves ready, you have your kit ready, because it's a workout, a real one.
Yeah, we're all about aerobics. Get ready.